The 5 passages that Christopher Rufo cited appear to have been taken partly from other published works without quotation marks. It's like the definition of plagiarism? That's Kamala! Wow! Was MLK looking down at little Kamala Harris?
So if you want a president with their own ideas, vote for Donald Trump. If you want a president who copies her own ideas from Wikipedia, vote for Kamala Harris.
Hey! Kamala Harris is a plagiarist. Big surprise. Her writings are as fake as her campaign and her entire career. This story was brought to us courtesy of Christopher Rufo with a nice exclusive here. He says, you know, Kamala has plagiarized at least a dozen sections of her criminal justice book called Smart on Crime by Kamala that came out according to a new investigation, even ripping off materials from Wikipedia. Now, the investigation was done by this guy, Dr. Stefan Weber, a famed Austrian, quote, plagiarism hunter who was taken down German politicians in their world. We independently, says Christopher Rufo, confirmed multiple violations which are comparable in severity to the plagiarism found by Harvard and the former Harvard president Claudine Gay. We remember Rufo delivered on that story big time. So he's confirming and vetting this, and he walks us through a number of different passages that we'll go through in detail. But let me take us back to who he references, which is this guy, the plagiarism hunter, which is Stefan Weber, because Weber also put together a monster report. And what's so interesting about this is the New York Times is already politicizing this story, which is just a fact-based report from Rufo that is showing that there are documents that certainly look like they're very similar, right? This was exactly, here's one post. Kamala Harris wrote, in Detroit's public schools, only 25% of the students who enrolled in grade 9 graduated from high school, while 30.5%, blah, blah, blah. That matches right there. The blue matches the blue, and the yellow matches the yellow. So clever Kamala Harris is so sneaky. That's just what these Democrats do. You got to be careful with it. They're like, oh no, we changed everything. That's our policy. No, you didn't. You just stole it from the AP. Somebody else wrote that. You just put the last paragraph up first, kept the middle paragraph the same, and put the first paragraph at the end. It's the oldest trick in the book, man. We got busted doing this crap in like 5th grade, right? You couldn't do this. You get busted. But Kamala can do it. Nobody cared for a long time. So same thing happened here, right? Kamala Harris, literally, it's word for word. High Point had its first face-to-face meeting with drug dealers from the city's West End neighborhood. The drug market shut down, blah, blah, blah. John Jay Criminal College of Justice. Kamala ripped it off. The High Point strategy has since been implemented in Winston-Salem. Same thing right there, same thing. And here's another section about the New York court program. Word for word, verbatim. Copying the Bureau of Justice Assistance and more. So several examples here from Christopher Rufo. And what do they say about him? Well, that he is a conservative activist who's just trying to smear her. The report by Rufo says that the presidential nominee copied 5 short passages from her 2009 book on crime. And a plagiarism expert says that the lapses were not serious. Okay, but first of all, they're minimizing the problem because Christopher Rufo's second post referred us over to Dr. Stefan Weber from Germany, who posted this, which is 49 pages of materials, including Kamala ripping off MLK Jr. Unbelievable. From a Playboy interview. So we'll see where this goes. But the New York Times is terrible as always. They say the conservative activist, Christopher Rufo, published claims that Kamala's a plagiarist. And they try to minimize this. They say, well, he just took 500 words out of her 65,000 word, 200-page book. So it's a little bit of plagiarism, just like it's a little bit of Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment buildings in Colorado. It's not a huge problem, so just shut up about it, okay? As long as it's only a few buildings, it's not that big of a deal. In a review of the book, the New York Times found that none of the passages in questions took the ideas or the thoughts of another writer, which is considered the most serious form of plagiarism. So it's just like minimal plagiarism. Kamala's so pathetic, she can't even do serious plagiarism. That's how weak she is. The 5 passages that Mr. Rufo cited appear to have been taken partly from other published works without quotation marks. Wait a minute, what? The 5 passages that Christopher Rufo cited appear to have been taken partly from other published works without quotation marks. It's like the definition of plagiarism. So thank you. Now, Jonathan Bailey, a plagiarism consultant that Kamala Harris hired. No, she didn't, I don't know. But somebody close to them probably like, we need a consultant on this one. Anyone know who works with plagiarists a lot? This guy's like, yeah, I graduated from Harvard. You can trust me. And the publisher of Plagiarism Today, there's a whole magazine. Is Kamala going to have the cover next month? There's a whole magazine. All right, you should put her on the cover. I can't believe it. That's a great idea. Now, he said, the amount of plagiarism amounts to an error and not an intent to defraud. He said that Rufo had taken relatively minor citations, and he made a big deal out of it, as Christopher Rufo tends to do. Not to mention that Claudine and others are gone now for their plagiarism. Now, the Harris campaign, in a statement, rejected the accusations as a right-wing attack. Oh, this is a book that's been out for 15 years, they said. It's a lot more than just this book. book, known for his work opposing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Says Mr. Rufo, part of a loose confederation of conservative writers who are all just ending America, and they're targeting Tim Walz and Kamala Harris. And of course, they go through all the different segments here, and we'll go through the actual report. Now, some academics say the campaign is racist from Rufo, right? And Rufo posted about that. Rufo said, this is incredible that they're calling him racist now for simply pointing out the fact that there is plagiarism happening. Now, Rufo said that while he and his colleagues had examined mostly published work by white academics, plagiarism had shown up almost always among papers written by black scholars, particularly black women who work in diversity and inclusion. We can speculate as to why, said Rufo, but suggested, well, maybe it's DEI. Some academics have characterized the campaign as racist. Nobody is bringing that up other than them. Why can't we just talk about the plagiarism? Can't we just talk about the words on the page? Yes or no? So not only are they singling out Rufo, right? They're making Rufo essentially the lightning rod of this story, and they're using him very unfairly, I'll say, to smear the story, right? They're saying, oh, it's not a real story because it was brought to us by Christopher Rufo. And Christopher Rufo, as you know, hates black women or whatever their claims are, right? Totally insane. But that's what they say. So they say that this is just a smear on the story. Absolutely ridiculous. Why? Well, because this person did a 49-pager analysis on the rest of the plagiarism, and you can see the details of it here. So this comes over from Plagiarism. But here's what he says. You know, Germany's current minister for foreign affairs, Annalena Baerbock, and also Kamala Harris plagiarized their book. Now, they've done their first round of investigations, and so let's go through the document. Plagiarism allegations against Kamala Harris, courtesy of Dr. Stefan Weber and the team from Germany. Says Harris copy and pasted a Wikipedia article into her book, Smart on Crime. In total, this documentation highlights 27 fragments of plagiarism in her book. 27. So Rufo, I think, gave us 5 or 6 examples. There are 27. Plagiarism fragments can be proven from page 5 to 10. In live interviews, Harris did not speak freely, but repeated the content of her book verbatim, right? And they're saying he doesn't appreciate how they have enabled her to do that. He says, now, Harris gave live interviews. Some say it's common for people to just basically recite passages from their book. He says, I don't really think so. He says, it's unethical to reproduce text chunks verbatim, but maybe you guys do that over here. He says, it would be weird in Europe if somebody was just literally talking their book. That's what he writes. But I feel like we hear that all the time, right? Like everybody talks their book. But in Germany, that's like weird. Why would you copy? He says, different media should have different content. In some, it seems a rather cheap way of producing content. I would never have the idea to simply copy and paste the paragraphs from my current book when I'm interviewed on the topic for my book. Like I would actually discuss the book. I wouldn't just recite the things, is what he's saying, which I would agree with. But that's not what our culture is like in America. In fact, they all sound like they're scripted robots. 2-minute sound bites. They're not even interesting conversations at all. So I would prefer his methodology, but we don't live in that world here. Now, believe it or not, he says, we did this documentation driven by scientific interest and did not get a penny for it. The same as all of the other plagiarism cases with Annalena Baerbock and Diana Kinnert in Germany. In contrary, we had expenses. And as always, we do that to cover the problematic rise of the copy and paste culture, which is something we mock here all the time. The journalists are just copy and paste journalists, not even interesting. So what do these findings say about Kamala? Is she in part fake? Did her ghostwriter plagiarize? Maybe it's not her. Was it just the team behind her? No idea. But I let the other people from the US draw the right conclusions. Here's the full 45-pager. You see, this dude's been doing this for a long time. Blog goes all the way back to 2010, just cracking plagiarists all over the place. So it's not some biased right-wing hatchet hit job. This guy's been doing it since 2010 and has Kamala pinned. So let's go back through the report. Here's the big one that many people have known about this, but this one is pretty interesting to see it in a side-by-side like this. So Kamala wrote in her book, page 10 in the preface, she says, as for me, I had a stroller's eye view of a watershed moment in our country's struggle for social justice. This is Kamala reading, and I'll just use my voice, not hers, so we can save some brain cells. The civil rights movement that unfolded in Berkeley and Oakland, my early memories of a sea of legs marching. And of course, we picked up the language of the movement. She says, my mother used to laugh when she told the story about a time I was fussing as a toddler. Cranky Kamala. She leaned down to me to ask, Kamala, what's wrong? What do you want? And I wailed back, says Kamala, freedom. Yeah, right. Who does she think she is? Mel Gibson? And then here's what Martin Luther King said, okay? MLK Jr., that Kamala stole from, wrote this in the Playboy interview, 1981. It's page 134. Sources, he cites the sources, there they are. Says, I will never forget a moment in Birmingham when a white policeman accosted a little girl who's black, 7 or 8 years old, who was walking in a demonstration with her mother, right? There's the connection. What do you want? The policeman asked her gruffly, and the little girl looked at him straight in the eye and answered, freedom. Forgot the R. She couldn't even pronounce it, said MLK Jr., but she knew. That's Kamala. Wow. Was MLK looking down at little Kamala Harris. What a beautiful story that is. Wow. Now, again, many other things, right? These were other things that she ripped off. She says the incident was already reported by the New York Post. There may be other instances where she's just misappropriating historic quotes. These were not in her book, but she has attributed two similar quotes to her mother, but they match closely to the lines of other speeches, right? She was talking about, my mother always told me that you may be the first to achieve something, but make sure you're not the last, and so on. And this apparently came from Sandra Day O'Connor, right? She's ripping quotes off from other areas. The book reproduces content from a press release that was issued by her office, likely written by an assistant. So this is a press release, right? So this is her office, and they just pulled it into her book. So her office writes a book. Beyond the issue of copying it, the book claims that the San Francisco authorities, we, caught the defendant, whereas in the press release, he was caught and sentenced in Los Angeles for crimes. Only after his Los Angeles conviction did a partial fingerprint help the San Francisco PD match him, leading to his extradition to San Francisco, right? So she's ripping off her old press statements, which are also lies, which is, at least you could say, well, that's her office at least, right? You can see that is just all copy and pasted right there. Boop. We take the red, we connect it over to the red, we take the green to the green, and then boom, there you go, right? It's just all lifted over. Now here, although the source was vaguely referenced earlier, she's also referencing the CDC stuff, it looks like a cdc.gov, violence prevention, just copying and pasting and lifting that. Here are some more examples. Most of the article was copied into the book, but they just copied from San Francisco Gate, another article. Absent-minded consequences of truancy, right into her page. Here's one from NBC News, and you can see, right? We don't have to draw the colors to match everything up, but this is troubling data in Detroit's public schools. Here it says, in Detroit's public schools, 24.9%. So it's the same pattern that we saw with Claudine Gay. They take a lot of the same stuff and just kind of modify the statistics a little bit. Here's from the CSI Effect. So this guy, Andrew Thomas, wrote about the CSI Effect. Look at that one. Ooh, that's pretty bad. Chief prosecutor for Maricopa County, Andrew Thomas, is the chief prosecutor, which includes the city. His office prosecutes that. Yeah, and so he just ripped it off from him, right? There you go. That's his article. She just pulls it right into her book. That's his article. She pulls it right into her book, calls it as her own. Same thing's happening here. This is another senator's press release. Copy and paste that. Another one from Megan's Law. Copy and pasting from that. So they've got her pretty well buttoned down on this. Another article there. Let's see where some of the Wikipedia stuff is. San Francisco Gate article. So a bunch of news articles. This is from AsianWeek.com, right? They're going around, not citing it, just copying. You could cite it, say, hey, these all came from these things, but they didn't. They just copy and pasted it. Here's more from the Bay Area, District Attorney's Office, government info. Here it is from Wikipedia. Okay, so check that one out. Yeah, there it is right there. The whole thing is copy and pasted. Screenshot from Wikipedia. Midtown Community Court. That paragraph ends up right there. Wow, right in pink. Nice job, Kamala. The yellow matches the yellow. And let's see where that blue comes in from the rest of the Wikipedia article is, I don't know where that blue came from. Oh, maybe from here. Yeah, down from there. So then they went and ripped off that document, community courts, and they're just copying and pasting. Very interesting way to write a book. They took this one from courtinnovation.org, stole that article, stole articles over here. The list goes on and on. All said and done, plagiarism in the book, Smart on Crime. They said Kamala Harris copied virtually an entire Wikipedia article into her book, gave no attribution to Wikipedia at all. She fabricated a source reference, inventing a non-existent page number also. The self-promotional content from Goodwill Industries was copied verbatim without citing the source. Goodwill Industries was her primary partner on the Back on Track program. These are the severe findings, I think. Then in other instances, even when a source was cited with a footnote, the text was directly copied and pasted without using quotes. Quotation marks would have been the most transparent and honest approach, also in non-academic books. Now, further signs of dishonesty, says this report, may be evident when sources were copied but specific details were altered, such as replacing a Subway store owner with a sandwich shop clerk, right? Because everybody can identify a Subway store owner. So if you copy and paste it, everybody goes, wait, Subway? You also had that happen to you in a Subway? That's weird. But less related or less severe findings. Now, in an interview with CBS, large portions of Kamala's book were reproduced verbatim, suggesting that the interview was scripted and that she relied on the preface and the introduction of the book to provide her responses. Now, some observers say this is rather common in the US. I think that's hysterical. Like in Europe, I don't know, maybe they're not so dumbed down. They're like, wait a minute, I already read your book, so I don't need to hear you say the same thing in your book. That's an interesting note, isn't it interesting? In Europe, they expect the politician to say something different. I guess in America, maybe Democrats don't read books. So Kamala, she could just read it and talk the first intro. And it was like, wow, this is great. She's so brilliant. Kamala Harris and Kimberly Emerson fabricated an interview about the book. Most sentences were copied verbatim from the CBS News interview. And that might be even a bigger scandal, right? Is that CBS is doing Audible readings with Kamala and trying to pass it off as news. Let's just talk about your book here. Falsely gives the impression of a live conversation. It's not. Half a year after the fake interview, Kimberly's husband had his career breakthrough. You're kidding. When President Obama appointed him to the Advisory Committee for Trade Policy and Negotiations and later ambassador to Germany. So this was like when Kamala must have been a senator. Both Kimberly and her husband assist in the Harris campaign. They're also on an open letter to endorse Kamala. It's so incestuous and disgusting. Now, Kamala Harris, as DA, influenced Senator Mark Leno to criminalize parents when their children miss 10% of their classes. Yeah, so broken families and broken homes, she was like arresting parents so their kids could then go, I guess, to the state, which is what they're in favor of. Criticized for creating problems mostly for Latinos and African Americans. Mark Leno gave a statement with big chunks copied from a white paper of Kamala Harris. And so it's just fake, man. Everything about her is fake. And fortunately, the American people are starting to see more and more of it. And it's all here. 49 pages. You want to go get the details on it, you can go to Dr. Stefan Weber and team. Just put him into the search engine box and you'll see it pop up. Now, Kamala came out and read something from a teleprompter. No idea if this was plagiarized. Probably. Or somebody wrote it and they plagiarized it from somebody. I don't know where it came from, but whoever wrote it, and it very well could be Kamala, because I do think she feels this way. Wherever it originated from, Kamala thinks it's true.
It is an honor, of course, to be with you this week as we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, as we speak truth about our nation's history. Since 1934, every October, the United States has recognized the voyage of the European explorers who first landed on the shores of the Americas. But that is not the whole story. That has never been the whole story. Those explorers ushered in a wave of devastation for tribal nations, perpetrating violence, stealing land, and spreading disease. We must not shy away from this shameful past, and we must shed light on it and do everything we can to address the impact of the past on Native communities today.
I don't know what that means, but I guess Europeans are in for a reckoning because our ancestors came over here 400, 500 years ago. And less than that, obviously, too. But all right, well, she seems almost a little giddy about this, and her eyes definitely seemed extra glazed in that exchange. So that's Kamala. She apparently hates white Europeans who brought devastation. It reminds me of Joe Biden's winter of misery and death, except this applies to all white Europeans, I guess. So here's JD Vance, who happens to be a white European, I think, who is now saying that Kamala maybe shouldn't have plagiarized her book.
I saw today, actually, a story that Kamala Harris apparently copied some significant chunks of her book from Wikipedia. So if you want a president with their own ideas, vote for Donald Trump. If you want a president who copies her own ideas from Wikipedia, vote for Kamala Harris.
Hey, JD! And it's not just copying them from Wikipedia. She copies them from Trump, too. Kamala Harris is walking around acting like she's a Republican now. She's like, yeah, you know, we're going to secure the border. Okay, what? Where you been for 3.5 years? You opened the border. Now you're going to secure it. And the litany of other laughable reverse courses from Kamala and Walz can go on. But JD Vance is right. She's fake, just like her book, just like her entire career, just like her candidacy.